Alright, we finally got a trade report or trade rumor that I can actually get behind. This coming from Brett Siegel of Clutch Points, him saying that both the Lakers and Warriors have expressed quote-unquote heavy trade interest in Herb Jones, a player for the New Orleans Pelicans that is currently having a down year per se, at least for his standard, currently averaging roughly 9.5 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, 2.5 assists per game, 1.4 steals per game, and shooting 39% from the field and 36.2% from 3. Definitely a top tier 3&D player in the NBA, a guy that's 27 and already has a first team all defense to his name, not to mention finishing 5th in Defensive Player of the Year voting back during the 23-24 NBA season. A guy that would be a great fit for their team in my opinion, really the perfect fit for that 5th starter in my opinion, of which that would be put around Luka, LeBron, Austin, and DeAndre Ayton. I think he would be a perfect fit and we're going to talk about why, what it would take to likely get him, the evidence supporting for why the Pelicans might trade him and then what it might take to get him from them, and why this support actually could hold some major validity, as Brett Siegel made another claim not too long ago that did turn out to be true, that being the Drew Timme signing, him saying before anyone and literally days before anyone that the Lakers were planning to sign Drew Timme, and it eventually did turn out to be true. So pointing to that, pointing to the Lakers' reported interest in Herb Jones and why it makes a ton of sense in my opinion, I think there's a lot to discuss here, so we're going to go through it. And well, beginning with the season that he's currently having, like I said, a bit of a down year for himself. I don't really care about too much of the numbers for a guy like Herb Jones, a guy that's more defensive minded and makes a lot of impact that doesn't really show up on the stat sheet. But with him currently having a down year quote unquote, actually could make him easier to trade for and possibly for a lower price than before, which according to reports was pretty much an untouchable price. This once again coming from Brett Siegel, saying that prior to this season he was off limits in trade talks after they signed him to a new contract, which was a 4-year contract worth roughly $80 million, a little over $80 million, being signed for $14.8 million next season, $20.8 million during the 27-28 NBA season, $22.5 during the 28-29 NBA season, and then finally $24.1 during the 29-30 NBA season. So yes, he does happen to be under contract for quite some time now, literally 5 full years going forward, half a decade into the next decade, and I think that does have to be factored into his overall trade value. After all, if you're trading for a player that's under contract for quite some time, that gives your team more security to trade for them, more kind of estimation for your overall payroll and future payroll, factoring that player into it, rather than an expiring contract. If you're trading for a player that's not under contract beyond this season, then you run the risk of them leaving your team for absolutely nothing in free agency, which would not be the case here for Herb Jones. So kind of combining that with his current impact and current production, I'd say that he has a slightly lower trade value from maybe this summer, but it's not a whole lot different in my opinion. Though again, the good thing here is that according to reports, he might be on the trade block or might at least be available for a trade to the right team and for the right price. As going off of that report again from Brett Siegel, saying that new general manager Joe Dumars has apparently grown exponentially more willing to trade him in recent months, following them signing him to that contract, but then the Pelicans being off to a terrible start, going 3-20 to start this season. They don't have a good future, present, let alone past the point too, and I don't think their future will include Herb Jones in it. As if they do enter a rebuild, Herb Jones at 27, which although is not old, is a better fit for a contender or maybe a short-term reset, short-term rebuild and turnaround, rather than a long rebuild which the Pelicans are likely looking at here. So again, according to this report and according to simply the Pelicans outlook, I think it's pretty likely that he might get traded. He can't be traded at this current moment, important to note here. With him signing that new contract, they do have to wait until January 14th to trade him, that being approximately 6 months after they signed him to that contract and therefore being eligible to trade him after that point. But when it comes down to it, and after that January 14th point, all the way until the trade deadline, he will be trade eligible and I guarantee the Pelicans will be gauging trade offers for him. But okay, great, he apparently will be available and the Lakers apparently do have interest in making a trade for him when he does become trade eligible, but why would it make sense for them to do so? Is he a good fit and could he be their missing piece quote unquote? Well, if you ask me, I think he actually could be. If you point to Lakers' current needs and pointing to their current team, I would say that their biggest needs are a big 3&D wing, a two-way wing like Herb Jones for example, a young player to fit their timeline, Herb Jones being 27 and pretty much the exact age of both Luka and Austin Reeves, another check mark for him. On top of that, they need more defensive-minded players, not only two-way players, but more defensive-minded, actually impactful players on defense and in multiple areas on defense. Once again, I would say check mark for Herb Jones here. Not only a good defensive-minded player that's good at one thing, but good at multiple things on defense. Not only at taking on tough one-on-one matchups on defense, not only at switching on defense, not only at being a versatile defender that can match up at multiple positions on the court. I'd say they can match up and pretty much guard any point guard, shooting guard, small forward, and even a majority of power forwards too. Yet another checkmark for Herb Jones. Then for kind of the cherry on top here, I would point to his defensive playmaking ability, something of which they have very little of, especially without Marcus Smart healthy and without him on the court. They have very little defensive playmaking. But for Herb Jones, a guy that averages over 1.5 steals per game on his career in only 30 minutes per game, translating to roughly 2 of them per 36 minutes. This season averaging 1.4 steals per game, again a little bit low for himself, but still top tier in the NBA overall here. Not to mention over 2.5 deflections per game this season, or with deflections as an overall metric and defensive stat, this coming from craftednba.com, ranking in the 93rd percentile in deflections, having a plus 5.1 value. Or then for a different defensive metric and different defensive stat, this being crafted defensive plus minus, having a plus 2.1 value rating, and ranking in the 94th percentile overall. So again, despite it being a down year for himself quote unquote, he's still been incredibly impactful and effective on defense. Compared to his peers and compared to the normal defender, not a guy like Herb Jones, it's still been very good. And in my opinion, put him on a team that has much better talent around him, much more offensive talent, and simply more talent in general, I think that his life and job would be a whole lot easier. He would make a bigger difference and likely get more motivation to get back to where he once was. Again, not a major drop off, but simply a minor one. I think that he would be a better fit, that he could be the missing piece of their team directly on defense, add more defensive playmaking ability to their team, better defensive intensity, better defensive talent, and ability to take on tough matchups. I think that could be a glove-like fit with Herb Jones in their team and in their starting lineup too. And then offensively, he really wouldn't have to do too much. I mean, playing with Luka, LeBron, and Austin, there's not going to be a whole lot of shots left, like we've seen with Rui Hachimura for example, getting 1 shot in a game not too long ago, often getting less than 5 to 8 shots per game, and for Rui Hachimura that's definitely not a good thing. Doesn't leave much room for him to be impactful on the court at that point, but for a guy like Herb Jones who is more defensive minded and can do more with less shots offensively, you know, taking fewer shots per game but still being fairly efficient from the 3-point line, is a 36.5 career 3-point shooter, 39% from the corner. On top of that is a good backdoor cutter. I think is a better backdoor cutter than Rui Hachimura for example. Again, doesn't really have to take many shots per game, still is a decent 5th option offensively, averaging 10.1 points per game on his career. Then obviously combining that with the defense and the major defensive upgrade that he would be for their team, I think that would be a great fit for their starting lineup, and a guy that definitely would be worth trading for. But with that in mind here, what would it take to trade for him? Well, it definitely would take a pretty hefty price in my opinion. If they're going to trade him, and if they're going to trade him to a team like the Lakers, it's definitely going to take plenty of trade assets, mainly with draft assets, of which they don't have very many, so we would have to give up a wide majority of them. And I have a few different options here. The first of which is kind of a baseline trade package, the one I'd start with and try to put on the table here to begin the negotiation, as I don't think they'd accept it. But my initial offer would be Gabe Vincent, Dalton Knecht, their 2031 first-round draft pick, completely unprotected, a first-round draft pick swap in 2030, and a second one in 2032. That would be my offer for Herb Jones. It would work financially, it would take his payroll off the Pelicans' salary and off their future payroll and book, give them an expiring contract with Gabe Vincent, give them a young player with potential like Dalton Knecht, and some draft assets for a future rebuild. I would hope they take it, but again I kind of doubt it. In my opinion, it probably would take Rui Hachimura, the Lakers' best expiring contract and by far the most valuable contract, including him in the trade package to get Herb Jones and give them something a bit more valuable in return for him. I mean, we're not going to trade Austin Reeves here, so the next most valuable player after that, and by far the most valuable expiring contract, does happen to be Rui Hachimura. a player they could trade for and then flip again for another draft asset. As the Lakers only have one first-round draft pick to offer, Rui Hachimura would kind of be a second one, a guy that's worth a probably late lottery pick with his expiring contract and with his overall value. I think if they would take a package of Rui Hachimura, one first-round draft pick, and maybe one or two future first-round draft pick swaps, then for a combination of Herb Jones and Jose Alvarado with him, I think it could be a fair trade for both parties. Again, Pelicans offloading future payroll with Herb Jones, offloading him to get some great draft assets to begin a rebuild for their team, getting another asset with Rui Hachimura that they can then flip again prior to the trade deadline. I think it could be a good fit, a good trade that mutually benefits both parties here, and again, the possible missing piece for a team like the Lakers. Again, obviously hypothetical here, not saying that's gonna happen, but it's great to hear that we have a report backing it up and backing up the claim that the Lakers apparently have interest in Herb Jones and eventually trying to make a trade for him. I think it's a great idea for them. I think it's something they definitely should explore and maybe even possibly do prior to the trade deadline. But those are only my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. How do you feel about the report? How do you feel about Herb Jones as a fit and as a trade target that might be worth trading for the purple and gold? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But I think that'll pretty much do it for this one. And if you enjoyed the video, then I'll greatly appreciate it if you dropped a like, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and hit that notification bell to never miss out when I upload a video. But as always, thank you for watching and have a great day or night.